I want to bring in Minnesota Democratic Senator Tina Smith. Senator Smith, as you probably know, this show has an attachment to the Twin Cities. It's once a week iteration. It was on WCCO for years. It's on WCCO now 5 days a week. I grieve for your community. The show grieves for your community. And there, as you know, Senator, is a relentlessness to tragic stories like this. We move on so rapidly. I don't want to move on rapidly. I want you to help my audience understand who Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark were. They're now dead as an act of political assassination. And who John Hoffman and his wife Yvette is. They were wounded and they're survivors.
Oh, Major, I so appreciate that, because in this world that we live in, this fast-paced world, we inevitably move on to the next thing, and I cannot move on from losing my friend Melissa and her husband gunned down in their front entryway, and my very good friends John and Yvette Hoffman. You know, we were all together the night before this happened in a big, joyous party celebration, and I am still just shattered by their loss. And I wish everybody could know who Melissa Hortman was. She was just intrepid. She was indomitable. She had just a kick-ass sense of humor. And she didn't just want to talk about problems, she wanted to fix them, which made her such a consummate legislator.
How are you doing and your staff doing and people in Minnesota in public life and near those in public life? How much fear are you working through?
Well, I mean, you don't just get over something like this. And Melissa and Mark's killing, and then the assassination attempt on John Hoffman and his wife, was a personal tragedy, but it also is an assault on our democracy. And so trying to think about all of those things together and keep them front and center at our minds at the same time we're thinking about the broad-based ramifications of what this means. And of course, we know that this assassin, we know that this was politically motivated. We know that he had a list of other elected officials and community leaders that he was intending to murder. And all of that is very much on people's minds as they're trying to figure out what is happening to our country and what does this mean for Minnesota that has always put so much faith and trust and pride in our sense of civic duty and obligation and working together in the civil society to make our state better.
What should this mean for protection of members of Congress, House and Senate?
We were having a conversation about that today, and I believe that we have to do a lot of work to understand what we can do to keep people safe. You know, taking on these roles, these jobs as elected leaders should not be a life or death decision. And the just irrevocable ramping up of violent rhetoric and violent action is just, you can't deny it. You know, I serve with Mark Kelly, whose wife Gabby was shot, and her life was forever changed because of that terrible attack. And that was in 2011. And since then, we just see this constant ratcheting up. And I mean, let's just be honest, when you have the President of the United States pardoning people who attacked the base of our government operations and people who committed assault against police officers, the dynamic of what this really means in our country today just seems very, very challenging. I think we're at a tipping point. We can either take a step back and try to figure out how to reclaim the civic ground, or we are going to inevitably continue down this path of more violence and more chaos. And we cannot let that be the path that we choose.
Senator Smith, social media is a place in the aftermath of events that your community has just experienced can be an ugly and rude and crude place. You confronted one of your Senate colleagues over something you found in one of those three categories. Explain to my audience what happened and what set you off.
My colleague Mike Lee from Utah posted in the aftermath of these killings a picture of the man who killed my friend and the Speaker Emerita of Minnesota, presumably from a security camera shortly before he gunned down these Minnesotans. And so he posted this picture twice, one with a feeble joke about our governor, Governor Walz, and the other with a message that basically says, this is what you get this is what happens if Marxists don't get their way. It was so hurtful to people to think that he would use this tragic occasion as a way to try to, score points on social media. So I wanted to talk to him directly about this instead of engaging through others or sending off a social media post of my own. I wanted to talk to him directly. So I found him yesterday and I told him exactly what pain he had caused by this. And I asked him to think about why he had done it and to take responsibility for what he was saying on social media, where he had well over nearly 8 million people engage with his tweet. This afternoon, he is elected to take both of those down. I'm glad for that, but I am awaiting any sign that he has a sense of what he did, what impact it had on people in Minnesota and around the country.
Did he apologize to you personally?
No, he did not. And what about apologizing to John Hortman and his wife Yvette? What about apologizing to Melissa and Mark's children who are in their 20s and have just lost both of their parents? And he used the person who murdered their parents as a way to, accomplish something on social media that was just only to benefit him. It's shameful.
The President of the United States was asked, flying back from the G7 summit, whether or not he intended to call the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz. He said that would be a waste of time. How do you interpret that?
Well, I heard the governor today respond to this similar question, and the governor noted that he's received outreach from so many people expressing condolences, as have I. I think this is just another example of how the President of the United States is not in touch at all with the humanity of people and what has happened to people. This isn't about politics in the sense that people have lost their loved ones. And he is so quick to pardon people who commit violence on his behalf, but yet he cannot hold accountable people. He can't hold people accountable. It's shameful.
Senator Smith, these are turbulent times, and there was another episode that happened last week to one of your colleagues, California Senator Alex Padilla. He went to the Senate floor today to talk about that experience. And the takeaway was, he said, look, if what happened to me, being thrown to the ground, handcuffed, can happen with cameras rolling to a United States senator, imagine what will happen and probably what has happened in this country when cameras aren't present and the person being roughed up by authorities under whatever power of law are less than senators.
Yeah. I mean, we see this every day. We don't have to imagine because we can see it. We've seen people show up for immigration hearings and then be ripped away from their children and detained. We've seen these raids where people are given no due process. And Alex's speech today on the Senate floor was so powerful because he did such a good job of connecting what happened to him to what this means for our country in this moment. And I want people to understand something that I didn't fully understand until I spoke with Alex, that he went into this federal building in California with he was escorted in by an FBI agent. And when the Secretary of Homeland Security's security detail approached him and hauled him out, the FBI agent was just standing there and did not do anything to clarify who Senator Padilla was. So it's shocking, really. And to be forced to your knees and then forced face down on the floor, as Senator Padilla was, while all they needed to do was to just simply ask, show me your identification, who are you? But they didn't do that. They chose to show their ability to force him in ways that is just really, it's shocking.
Is there a way, Senator Smith, for the country to escape what feels like a kind of numbness right now?
Well, I tried to demonstrate that yesterday by approaching Senator Lee in person, and not with anger or attacking, but to say, let's have a conversation about this. Let's talk about what this really means for people. And I have great faith in the people of this country, in their interactions, their human interactions with one another, to stay in touch with their humanity and their sense of connection and the things that bind us together in our communities and in our country. But we have to lift that up instead of just constantly trying to figure out how to fuel the fire. And I think that is what gives me hope, but I also feel that this is a very grave moment in our country's history. We've had tough moments before, but this feels deeply challenging. And I just hope that everybody will stay in touch with their core humanity and try to not get caught up in all of this hatred and division.
Minnesota Democratic Senator Tina Smith. Senator Smith, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.